Welcome to EXP Express Notes on CIMA P3 Performance Strategy. Today we're going to talk about management control systems and their relationship with the objectives of a company. Now, let's just think about this for a moment. Management controls, these are formalized procedures and processes that are introduced by senior management in order to direct the activities of the organization that they're responsible for. Now, what are the sorts of things that management control systems address within the organization? Well, some of those items would include measuring activities. In other words, there's a lot of things going on inside the company, and management have to keep in touch with performance, both in a financial sense and also non-financial. In other words, there's a tremendous amount of information which flows up through the organization so that management can fulfill or discharge their responsibility effectively in supervising the affairs of the company. Hopefully this will be selected data which is relevant and useful for their purposes. Now, why is that? Because the information is designed to inform and also to support decisions that are taken by managers, not the least of which concerns resource allocation. And of course, we also would expect from management control systems a mechanism not only that controls or supervises staff, but also communicates with them and ideally motivates everybody in the organization. Now, the overall purpose of such management controls is to make sure that effectively everyone is pulling in the same direction, i.e. that their activities are coordinated and therefore that the objectives of the organization as a whole can be achieved. And it is, of course, the responsibility of senior management to make sure that such controls are in place and that they are consistent with the objectives of the organization. We'll have a lot more to say about this idea. Now, if one were to make a sort of a free sort of spontaneous list of the sorts of things that a company must have in place in order to be able to exercise proper supervisory functions, we can imagine that they would include employment contracts so that the relationship with employees and expectations are properly documented and formed. Internal policies and procedures. One can imagine, or maybe think back to the first day on a new job when someone handed a new employee a policy handbook or procedures or staff handbook on what the rules are with regard to the functionings of the organization. Then, of course, there will be discipline and incentive schemes. This is both the carrot and the stick, if you will, to motivate or incentivize people to perform above expectations, and to also have orderly and fair disciplinary procedures when people fall short of performance expectations. Then, of course, minimum at the end of the year, perhaps more often, there would normally be a system of appraisal and feedback to employees, which is an exercise which is not always given the attention and the care that it really deserves. And finally, it's extremely important, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, these are just some examples of the sorts of things that characterize how control is achieved within an organization, is that reporting lines should be consistent with the responsibilities that exist in the organization so that one doesn't have duplications of efforts or that certain things fall between two people and certain things are not taken care of. It's what I like to call the everybody and nobody syndrome. Now, with respect to the design of management control systems, it's useful to think about these things according to two general schools of thought which address this issue. They're not necessarily conflicting with one another. One likes to think that there is some truth that can be extracted from both of these points of view. The contingency school is making perhaps an obvious statement: there is no single universally valid management control system. In other words, one cannot sort of buy a book which has the best system in the world, control system, and simply implement it. In other words, the appropriate control system for an organization has to be adapted to the circumstances. It depends on the organization's specific objectives. The environment is very important in which the organization operates. Is it a very fast-moving environment? Is it a very stable environment? Is there a great deal of uncertainty or not? And thirdly, the organization's own internal structures in terms of what it will permit and not permit will influence the kind of management control system that is implemented. Another way of looking at this issue is the so-called institutional school, which is focusing on the norms internal to the organization and the way in which these norms are influenced both from internal factors and also by organizations within the same industry. Again, one likes to think that there is truth in both of these schools of thought, that the institutional point of view is focusing on norms, again, what is internal to the company, but also quite importantly, very importantly, is what's happening externally within the same industry. Which means effectively that we are also looking at and being influenced by the environment around us and how fast moving or stable that environment may be with regard to competitors, market tastes, and that sort of thing. So basically what we're saying is that the control systems have to be adapted to the circumstances, and they must be appropriate to the structure of the businesses being served. And in the same way, we can say that the management accounting system, the systems of information flow and reports and so on, are constantly evolving. In other words, one never achieves the perfect system. That simply does not exist. Now, the final key idea that we need to establish is that within any properly operating organization, there has to be goal congruence. What do we mean by goal congruence? We want to make sure that the managers at their various levels in the organization and the individuals working within departments and so on throughout the organization are all operating with goals and making efforts that are consistent with the organization's overall objectives. It's, as we said before, everybody has to be pulling in the same direction. And in order to achieve these, we have to assign responsibilities within the organization. We have to make it clear who's responsible for what. The people with responsibility have to be given authority to be able to act within the areas of their responsibility. And they need to be accountable to a higher level. So we have a hierarchy, effectively, in this situation. And finally, we need to have a feedback system and the possibility to evaluate performance within the context of the idea of controllability, that managers are expected to be able to be accountable for or responsible for those areas over which they have effective control. Now, this is why careful thought has to be given to the organizational structure, how we organize our cost centers, revenue centers, and profit centers, and the highest of all, the investment center. These are defined as you see here, and the degree to which an organization can be or should be centralized or decentralized. To decentralize an organization implies that one has sufficient managerial resources able to do the job competently. Finally, there are costs of quality, and 4 elements that one should keep in mind They fall into the four categories you see here with regard to internal and external failure costs, prevention costs, and appraisal costs. This, of course, also falls within the area of responsibility of management to ensure that quality is achieved.